When we start building out your intergenerational trauma tree and see where the leaves fall and like who, suffered what and what kind of trauma responses that they have, all of that feels heavy. So it's going to be really important to first settle. I always say we start with the body, we go back to the body. And for those of us who are really busy, when it feels like too daunting of a task, I always say, well, you know what? It probably takes you about 3 minutes to walk from that boardroom to your office. So if that's 3 minutes of deep breathing that you have carved into your day. So while you walk, you can deep breathe, right? There's a lot of moments where we can really just integrate healing into our day, and it doesn't have to feel like that added task that we have to do at the end of the day to make sure that we're okay, but it's just a way of being.
This is the Gold Digger Podcast. I am so excited about today's guest, and I was just telling her, man, we should have had you on a few months ago, but I think there is no time better than today. So Dr. Mariel, welcome to the Gold Digger Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be just in conversation with you and to be talking about this, because I tend to nerd out when we're talking about healing.
You are in the right place. So you do incredible and deep work. Like when I think about your work, I just think deep. Talk to me about how you started studying intergenerational trauma and what that has looked like, because you've been doing this for a very long time. Mm-hmm. So how did you get started? What piqued your interest about it?
The actual moment when I was like, oh, something needs to shift in my work, in my research, in my practice, in everything, and even in my own like self-introspection and like self-discovery, was when I was actually in what we call like clinic team meetings when I used to work in a hospital. And we would be having these conversations about some of our clients just to kind of like see like who has some ideas of what direction to take next and things like that. And the stories that we would tell about our clients all sounded the same. Like they were different people, right? Maybe from different countries, maybe different backgrounds, but the same stories kept coming up. And I kept thinking like, we're not naming what this is. Like, why is it that, this woman has like these people-pleasing qualities that are of such great disservice to her, but she also comes from a family line where perhaps like a parent of hers had those same qualities and they just, modeled that to this client. And then a grandparent that also had those kinds of qualities, or maybe even did things that made their daughter like, people please. And so I'm like, you know what? Like, I just feel like if we're going to be helping a person to release like all of these layers, why aren't we digging into the layers? So the work really started from there. It was like just this point of curiosity, really wanting for people to feel like true healing. Some of the people that I actually got so fortunate to work with, but they had been a part of that clinic. And I used to work at a Columbia Medical Center and in the psychiatry clinic. And they had been a part of the clinic for well over 20 years. And I kept thinking, why are we here still 20 years later? Like, we're probably not getting to the root of what is continuing this process of depression and anxiety. And we're just kind of mislabeling what's happening. Maybe it's trauma that's at the root, and it's trauma that's layered. And we need to get to the root to actually help this person to no longer be this perpetual client.
I love that you went deeper, because I feel like there are so many people who are like, this is just how it is. This is the way it's always been. And the people that I feel most drawn to are the people that keep asking, well, why? Yes. Why? And I feel like you are one of those. You brought up the word trauma. Let's kind of break down generational trauma. Like, what is that? How would you know if you have it? What are questions that listeners could be asking themselves as you and I navigate this conversation together?
Yes. Intergenerational trauma is the only type of trauma that's actually passed down our family line. And it happens at the intersection of two modes of transmission. So it's by way of our psychology, which is basically like, everything that tends to happen in our day-to-day lives, and the ways in which maybe we may have been misattuned to a parent, or the ways in which, we probably got bullied in school, or maybe we were in a turbulent relationship that had like toxic elements to it. It's in all of that, but it's also in our genetics, in our biology. And that's where, you know, the distinctive mark of like intergenerational trauma from other types of traumas that maybe just happen to one person. What happens with intergenerational trauma is that if we have a parent that they themselves lived in a state of chronic trauma, meaning they were in a traumatized state, they never really had the tools or access to actually dissolve some of those traumas and trauma responses in their lives. And so they just kind of lived out of survival mode for a long period of time. Their actual body starts to register, oh, we're in a traumatized body. We are, and so like genes start to what we call like re-express. They start to register that this is the new normal. What happens at conception is that we actually pass down genes that have this messaging to our children. And so it becomes basically like an emotional vulnerability or maybe even predisposition to stress and trauma. And when we get all those other kind of psychological factors, if we have a parent that we can't really connect with, especially early on, and all those other things that happen, we can become the new legacy bearers of trauma.
How do we break the cycle? I mean, you have a book called Break the Cycle, but, you know, one thing that's really interesting is, so I recently started doing therapy, and I don't know what took me so long, to be honest. And, you know, I think a lot of it is establishing, especially for people that have children, is like what cycles need to be broken and like what cycles can continue, what cycles are good. So when you're talking about this, it can kind of almost feel helpless of like, well, what if somebody passed something down to me and like, it's not mine to carry? How do we break this? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, you know, that's a part of the reason, perhaps even the most compelling reason, one might say, like why I decided to write the book, because I kept feeling like whenever we were talking about intergenerational trauma, we were talking about it as if it was a hard stop. And that's not the case. When we come from lineages where there's been pain, especially emotional pain that has been translated into the emotional pain that's been passed down by multiple family members, yes, it can make us more tender. We do have potentially a bit more work to do on the emotional end of our lives. But that also means that we have opportunity. We have a chance to actually do things both on the psychology and the biological end that can actually help us to break the cycle, which is why I integrate the modalities that I do, which is holistic psychotherapy, into the actual book and into my work, because I want us to experience full healing. I want us to be able to feel integrated as a whole and be able to feel like we have the tools to actually, on a daily basis, break those cycles and disrupt and welcome in new legacies.
What would you say if somebody's listening and they're like, how would I even know if I have trauma like passed down to me? Where would you begin with that?
I always go back to the body. And the reason why I go to our bodies is because our bodies have this reservoir of memory. We have what we call body memory, which is situated primarily in our nervous system, but it is really in a lot of places in our bodies. And it is kind of what is also connected to triggers. Like if we smell, you know, maybe like a perfume that is familiar and was the same scent that we smelled like when, you know, right before we got into a car accident and it just got cemented into our brains, like that smell pairs with a tragic accident, right? And so like there is this retrieval that your body does that allows us to also like have an understanding of, okay, something happened, it didn't feel good. It made me feel like I needed to fight for my life. And we can utilize that body memory to almost kind of take ourselves not necessarily back to moments, but that we can have a better awareness of how our bodies are responding, and then actually help our bodies to feel more at ease and more relaxed, which is why, you know, I always say, like, let's go back to the body. Let's try and understand what happened here. And many times when we start talking about people's childhoods or their parents' childhoods, and we start unearthing some of the layers, there is a little bit of a nonverbal shift that tends to happen, right? Where people start fidgeting a bit more, they look a little more uncomfortable. And so that's when we start digging into, okay, you know what? You don't look as comfortable as you did 5 minutes ago. Something's happening. Where do you feel it in your body? Usually people will say, oh, I feel some tension in my neck. My stomach's a little bit tied up in knots. There's something happening that's telling you, you know what? This era of my life, even though I had loving parents, I didn't feel all that safe. I didn't feel good in this. When, my mother would scream because she had a really tough day at work, actually, I wondered if she was okay. And that, for my tiny little brain, my 5-year-old brain, was something that was really hard to comprehend and internalize and understand. And the way that I internalized that was that I believed that maybe I was the bad kid that was making her feel, all kinds of ways, rather than a more complex thinking, which is she had a bad day at work and she's displacing onto me. And so, we can start digging into the layers and unpacking even wonderful experiences in our lives that maybe had an element that we hadn't really kind of touched on before, but has been buried deep within and sometimes can come up in inopportune times. And so I always like to go back to the body because it is a source of great wisdom and allows us to really have a better understanding of how things and events and people impact us.
I love that. And that is something that my therapist has been using a lot is we'll talk about something and then she'll say, where do you feel it in your body? Yes. And then she'll say, what is your earliest memory? It cannot even make sense of feeling that way. And it is crazy how connected things can be, or how you can source out these different memories or woundedness or different things and pull them into your periphery and just have them have an awareness around it, which I think is really beautiful. So if somebody is listening and they can maybe kind of sink into their body right now, and maybe even just this conversation is bringing things up for them, how do you kind of work through that? Is it just stuck in your body forever? Do you get rid of it? How do you retrain your body? Where do you go from there?
Oh, I love this question. The point is to actually retrain our bodies to work in our favor and not against us. That's always the goal. And in part, right, it's about looking at the moments when we're feeling discomfort and then pairing that with a relaxation response or a relaxation practice, right? So that we can actually feel the tension release from our bodies. And that's, just one of the ways in which we can actually integrate health where health did not exist before. However, for most of us, it's going to be actually more critical for us to integrate holistic healing into our day-to-day lives in a more proactive way. Because a lot of healing tends to be very reactionary. It's, I'm hurt, I go get help for the hurt that I'm experiencing. What we noticed during especially the COVID-19 pandemic was that a lot of people were wounded and were hyper busy and not attuned to the wounding that was deep within. And then when they were confined to a home or to an empty space and they had to confront themselves, they were like, oh my goodness, I don't even know what to do with myself right now. And that opened up a can of worms for a lot of people. And in comes a global mental health crisis, right? And so, it's going to be really critical for us to also be proactive about our health in a holistic way, right? We have a ton of science around the benefits of meditation, not just for the sake of ease in your mind and body, but also the fact that your actual brain starts to form new neural connections. It actually starts to almost kind of build upon itself in a healthy way. And very often what tends to happen when people experience trauma or when they experience something as debilitating and long-standing as depression, anxiety, right, or long-standing stress, is that they feel like they don't hold a lot of power in reference to their own mental health. But when you can see the little things that you're able to do on a daily basis, like 5 minutes of breath work or a 5-minute meditation, something that can start that rewiring process, it can really help empower you to say, you know what, I've got something that is tangible, accessible at all times, like the breath, that I can use to help me be better, not just now, but in the long term, because I'm building health promoting neural networks and I'm building a nervous system that is actually more regulated and can help me be a better mom, be more attuned, be more mindful, be a better partner, because I have a more settled nervous system when my partner asks me something that would have actually rattled me on any other given day, right? Like I can be a better daughter because like I can listen to the things that my parents would have said that maybe would have been more triggering, but now I'm like, you know what? I can actually just let that roll off my shoulders because I'm sitting with the information differently. There's so many benefits, but I really do feel like we hold a lot more power than we give ourselves credit.
I think this is so powerful, and I love too your emphasis on being proactive. One thing that I think is really interesting, and maybe some of my listeners can relate, is that I'm someone with ADHD. I've told myself for years, like, I'm just not someone who can meditate. And I believed that for so long, right? Like the thought to me of trying to be still and have no thoughts was so intimidating and impossible to understand. And until I recognized that it's not to not have thoughts, it's to have an awareness around your thoughts and to really just pay attention. I think that having an awareness really unlocks that next level of just being able to see when you're triggered or understand when you're feeling those feelings or come back to your body when you're feeling out of it. And so for anyone that's listening and they're like, yeah, good for you, I can't meditate, my brain's too busy, or I've got too much, it's like, but can you bring just a different level of awareness? Would you agree with that? Or I could be totally off base here.
No, you're like right on. And even in my book, I say there are all of these different types of meditations. You can do a walking meditation, you can do yoga, you can do, a mindfulness coloring, right? Like all kinds.
Yes.
And, I myself, I'm a therapist that's been meditating since 2007, right? However many years that is. And I started off with 60 seconds a day because that's all that my brain could actually hold at once. And I was all over the place. And I continue to, the amount of meditation that I do that's a simple sitting meditation and just attending to the silence in the room is about 5% of what I do maybe throughout the entire year. The rest of it, because my mind is a busy mind and I myself struggle with, attentional difficulties of my own, I need movement. So for me, I have to engage with yoga, tai chi, and really incorporate, even dance. I like dance with my dogs, like in my living room, in between meetings sometimes, just to really kind of get my body moving, but also releasing the tension while also being mindful that I'm doing only one thing right now. And that one thing is helping me to do all these health promoting things that I really need for the longevity of my well-being.
Yeah. One thing you referenced, and I think that it should be something that while people are setting their goals and intentions for the new year, creating their vision board, is nervous system regulation. Talk to me about that and why that is so important, especially for ambitious, driven humans who are likely entrepreneurs, overwhelmed, busy, high cortisol level inducing jobs. Why would nervous system regulation be something that we should be focusing on this year?
Yes. I'm going to tell you right now, it is all the more important for individuals that are high functioning and that their attention is in high demand. And a part of the reason is because there are so many benefits to being able to have a nervous system that you feel like you have, maybe like you're befriending and you're more in control of. And I'd like to start us off just by briefly kind of just taking us through the nervous system. I think that can be helpful because there's in essence 3 branches of it, right? We have our threat alert system, which is fight or flight, and it's telling us, oh my goodness, there might be a threat and I must protect myself. So I have to fight this person who's like coming to me with whatever, or I have to flee, I have to avoid them. Then there's the dorsal vagal response, which is our emotional shutdown response, which is saying, this stressor has been here for forever. I don't feel like I can fight it. I'm going to freeze and dissociate, or I'm going to fawn and people please and just do whatever it is that this person needs from me because I need the threat to go away. It's just overwhelming. And then we have this ventral vagal response, which is our parasympathetic nervous system, which is basically our calming, restoring, soothing part of our nervous system that says, you know what, the threat is gone, you're okay, you can relax, you can release, you can rest. We can go, of course, we're in essence like structured to go from the very first one, fight or flight, into that ventral vagal, okay, you can rest. We're not supposed to be going too far into dorsal vagal, oh my goodness, emotional shutdown. And so what we can do for ourselves with these practices that I mentioned, the ones you mentioned as well, is that we can sit in that ventral vagal response more often. And I think that the most beautiful thing that can offer us, especially if we do this on a continuous basis and offer ourselves kind of a restructuring of our own biology, is that it buys us time. And what I mean by that is that it buys us reaction time. So instead of there being like a microsecond between what someone says and what you respond, that is driven by anxiety or, just a response that's driven by some sort of an intense emotion, that's in essence, that's what a trigger is, right? You triggered me by what you said, I responded right away. Instead of that, we're buying 2 to 3 seconds of time. And that allows us to kind of like go into our minds and bring out our wisest self. We bring out our values in our response. We bring out how we want to actually connect with the person in front of us. There's so many benefits to those 2 to 3 seconds. This seems really minuscule, but it actually can be so life-changing. And when we're in these corporate meetings or high-powered meetings where we want to preserve the relationships that are there. We want to be able to make decisions that coincide not only with our highest selves and our core values, but also with the part of our minds that are structured to actually help us with higher level thinking, which is not going to be fully functional when we're in a survival mode, because that's the way that our body works. When we're in survival mode, part of our brains, part of our gut systems, some of our organ systems actually mildly shut down to preserve energy. So that means that you're not going to be able to actually be as good of a critical thinker and a solution-focused leader in your work to the extent that you can be if you're constantly in that heavy stress response. But if you're in that ventral vagal, I'm in a calmer place, I can reflect my values and all of that, it allows you an opportunity to buy that time and then respond from a place that at the end of the day, when you're going to sleep, you can say, I did well today, I'm proud.
Oh, that is so powerful. And I think too, I've been hearing more about nervous system work and just regulation and all of that among leaders. And I think it's a beautiful conversation, especially to be had, especially for people who are in that go, go, go mode. One thing that you spoke about that I think is really powerful, and honestly, part of the reason why I wrote my book, How Are You Really, during the pandemic when people were forced to face, am I who I said I was going to be when things slowed down? Yeah. Because things didn't just slow down, they came to a halt. Is like, how, if somebody's listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, like, I am running away from honesty, whether it's honesty with generational trauma, whether it's honesty with I'm faking the enjoyment of my life, whether it is honesty with I'm in a relationship that needs to change. What is like the first step to invite someone to like slow down and like come back home to themselves and their truth so that they can start to kind of move forward?
I'm a big fan of us being able to write, right? Especially for us busy minds, right? The ones that have been conditioned to be like hyper busy, right? Like 8 years in a doctoral program, I have a tough time turning that off. And I'm sure that that's the case for anybody, who's listening, who has that kind of like drive. And so I am a big proponent of just utilizing the energy that wants to come out, for it to come out in a way that can actually be productive towards our healing and our healing journey, which means like writing down whatever comes to mind, right? That can be a way to deposit thoughts onto paper and allow the paper to then, once we read back through it, to tell us, okay, wow, these are the things that were happening in my head and that I was like really not attending to when all I was thinking about was that big project that that kept me busy. So it's
Yeah.
it's an opportunity that we allow ourselves to just like really focus in on our minds and allow our minds to be the central part of our day for those 5 minutes or 10 minutes that we allow it to be. And I think that, because we're in such a tech driven world, it's something that I continue to practice, but I've gotten so good at it lately. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
shocked at myself even because I'm a tech junkie. And, I'm also a millennial, right? So like, tech is all around us. We love tech. And so that is what it is, but I actually put my phone in places where I know I won't locate it right away when I'm doing a practice because
Yeah.
and I put it on silent, right? Like I really want to attune. And part of the reason is because I read these studies. I've seen it in action. I've seen the change in myself, in my family, who's also integrated some of these practices into their day to day, even my elderly parents. I've seen it, in my nephew who's 16, who, is somebody who grew up under that idea of like having a mindful moment in his day. And I see it in my clients. I see it all the time. I see people's lives just kind of like blossom and illuminate when they just take those 5 minutes. And I always tell people you have 1,440 minutes in a day. You can take those 5 minutes just for you and apply it to like seeing where your mind goes and what your mind needs you to attend to in this very moment.
Okay, I love this. And it's so interesting. I was speaking with one of my cousins who teaches elementary art, and she was saying that kids these days like have trouble looking at like a blank piece of paper and being creative because they're always engaged, right? And that's like so sad to me. One thing that we started doing, and I think my listeners would love, and you might even love this, is there is this box. It's called Aro, ARO, and it has phone chargers in it. It's this beautiful white box with a bamboo top. We have it in our pantry, and you plug your phone into it, and it tracks how much time your phone is in the box, and it gamifies your phone being in the box, just like social media gamifies likes and comments. So it creates a contest between my husband and I of who can have their phone in the box more. We sleep with our phone in the box. When we're with our kids, the phone is in the box. And I just like love that. Yeah, it's like you're seeing life through a totally different lens. You're way less distracted. You're way more engaged, whether that's with children or your spouse or yourself. So I love that. I think that there are so many different ways that we can invite that in a little bit more. And maybe that's something that people can really focus on in this new year of what does that look like? And what do you fill that time with? One of the things I love about that box is that when you take your phone out, it'll say, like, congratulations, you just got back 33 minutes of your life. What did you do? And you get to track what you did. And so it could be like, I went on a walk, I was with my kids, I read a book, and it kind of will categorize what you're doing on your time outside of your phone. This is not sponsored by any means. It's a very small business, but I just love it because it's been really fun for us. We use it every single day. It's been really transformative for us.
It sounds incredible, and it sounds like they have a new customer in me because that's exactly what my family and I
Yes.
need. And I love the fact that it offers that positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
And I actually, as a way to kind of like help my nephew create a little bit of distance just for a day, like with his phone. I took his phone. I consented with him. I'm taking your phone. I'm just like, I'll give it back. And when I gave him back his phone, I was like, how was it being without your phone? And he said, actually, I realized that the trees had turned green and the birds were chirping now.
Isn't that
It
beautiful?
was so beautiful. And I was like, that's amazing. That's the mindfulness that I know you can get into. I love this for you. And like, maybe
Yeah.
yeah, he took a stroll. There's a little park in front of the house. He took a stroll through the park and just like started observing leaves. And this is a
Yeah.
16-year-old, like someone who is digitized from birth. And it's just so
Yeah.
beautiful to be able to see that disconnect that is so important for social connection.
One thing that I love that you talk about is this multi-generational approach. So, right, we can see it in our children or our nieces or nephews. We can also see it with our parents. And when you think about breaking down generations worth of trauma or trying to break some of those cycles for our own children, Where would a listener begin if that is something where they recognize, like, hey, there are certain things I don't want to pass down, whether it's a belief or a pattern? Where do you start with that?
I would start with opposites, right? I mean, like, of course, like, I offer as many of the practices and strategies that have been offered to me in the years of like, therapizing folks. And also I drew from a couple of people and even in my family who are direct parents. And so there's a number of things that are kind of general go-tos that in society we kind of miss the mark on doing back in the day, right? Like apologizing to children, for example, right? Not something
Yeah.
that we would have necessarily considered maybe in generations past, but it's so critical to the relationship that a parent can have with their child. And it's also critical in the relationship a child can then have with themselves. And, but usually parents are like, there's so much and I don't really know where to start. And I always say, go back to your childhood. Just think about it for a second and think about the thing that you were like, this does not feel good to me. I don't like this. I don't like the way I feel. I feel, a sense of shame. This, it just doesn't sit well with my soul. This isn't good. And do the opposite. Whatever that opposite might be, right? Like maybe it was that, yeah, you had the parent that was the yeller, right? And you felt like anything could happen in those moments. And that sense of perpetual fear and terror was something that you didn't want to pass on to your child. Then maybe some of those nervous system practices that can help you like gain those 2 to 3 seconds might be for you. They might be helpful in helping you to gain the number of seconds that you'll need to not be reactionary in a way that actually can maybe like, cause your child to have a similar emotional experience to what you had growing up.
I love the opposites. I feel like, it's so interesting as a parent. There are certain things that my parents did where I'm like, that was amazing. I am 1000% doing it. And then there are certain things where I'm like, we're going to go the opposite direction on that. So I feel like that's very helpful. And I think too, again, it requires the listener to be introspective and to spend a little bit of time with themselves and their own experiences before just copying and pasting someone else's method or idea onto it.
Yes, yes. It's always about individualizing the work itself. And that's why I always offer a lot of prompts, like, and helping a person to really kind of go deeper in and do the digging work into their own life and then applying a concept to their life because our lives are so different, right? And my parents are very unlike anybody else's parents. And so my methodology and the ways that I need to apply the work will be different than the ways that, someone else might.
What are some recommendations you have for people to kind of start to face maybe some of the trauma they've experienced or to begin a healing journey, to let this year be a year where they start doing some of that deeper work? Where do they begin?
Well, I mean, I think that if a person is already considering that, it's already a beautiful start because it's already a very courageous decision to say, you know what, I'm going to break the cycle. That's really hard. Like just full stop right there, right? Like so many people, they like go directly from that decision right into the work. And like, to be honest, like we have to sit with that. We have to say, wow, like, I may be the person that people might look at and maybe like, have something to say about, because all of a sudden I'm showing up differently to family gatherings, right? Like I'm no longer engaging in certain conversations and I've held up, my barriers around what I want to engage in. And so it's a courageous journey and one that sometimes is filled with a lot of grief because we have to not only lose the connections that we had to unhealthy patterns, we have to lose parts of ourselves that held on to those patterns. We have to literally step into a new version of ourselves, and that's a process of loss, which requires grief. So what I would say, is one, just sit with that and maybe like sit with the pride of like, I decided to do this. Like, that's wonderful. Secondly, and perhaps more importantly than anything along the journey, is to start not with who hurt me, what did they do, who did what, who didn't do something. the digging work is actually the middle part of the work. It's not the work itself. The work itself is the actual, how can I live in a body that I don't feel I need to escape? How can I live in a body that I don't feel like I need to like over busy it so that I can feel alive? And that's the work. So it's doing more of that, creating almost kind of a lifestyle of taking care of yourself so that you can then do the digging work and you don't feel like the digging work is intolerable. When we start building out your intergenerational trauma tree and see where the leaves fall and like who, suffered what and what kind of trauma responses that they have, all of that feels heavy. So it's going to be really important to first settle. So that's why I always say we start with the body, we go back to the body. And when, for those of us who are really busy, when it feels like too daunting of a task, I always say, well, you know what? It probably takes you about 3 minutes to walk from that boardroom to your office. So if that's 3 minutes of deep breathing that you have carved into your day. So while you walk, you can deep breathe, right? When perhaps you brought some food from home and you have to like heat up your food in the office microwave. And if that's the case, then that's about 2 minutes where you can actually do a bit of mindfulness or, just like go somewhere and just like sit in your thoughts for a moment. I mean, there's just so many tiny opportunities that are there. I used to take the train to work, and in New York City, when I took the train to work, I would actually like put in binaural beats and solfeggio sounds at certain frequencies, into my headphones and just vibe, right? And just allow myself to feel the calm of the sounds. There's a lot of moments where we can really just integrate healing into our day, and it doesn't have to feel like that added task that we have to do at the end of the day to make sure that we're okay, but it's just a way of being.
I love that. I have been obsessed with like healing frequency music. It is literally all we listen to. Not only does it help calm my busy brain, but I feel like it changes the atmosphere of our house. Like Drew will laugh and he'll be like, "Are you trying to put us all to sleep?" And I'm like, "No, babe, that's your nervous system calming down." But that is literally what we listen to. And recently, I got a massage and I asked the massage therapist, I was like, "Can I just keep my headphones in? Because I listen to specific music that helps me to relax." And like that changed the experience because I was just so used to that music that it like helped me relax instead of being like, what lotion are they using? Does their stool have 3 legs or 2 legs? Like all these like weird places my brain goes. So I feel like even if somebody's listening today and the only thing you do is go onto Spotify or wherever you get your music and just put on some healing frequency music, notice how your body responds to it. I think it's really powerful.
It is. And people, if people want to also do it, like maybe while they go to sleep, I think that there's a notable difference in how soundly you're able to sleep when these frequencies are actually playing in the background. I mean, there's so many ways you can actually play with your healing in a way that, not a lot of things can really go wrong in this space, right? Most of it is just helping you to feel like gentler inside of your own mind and body. And so, it's an opportunity to get really curious as to where your body and mind can go. For some of us, we'll probably be like, I can't believe that I can actually be this calm. Like, this is not anything that I would have ever imagined because I'm so type A and, that's just not my flow and my personality. But in reality, some of us, who have a type A quality, some of that is just matched with, other things like perfectionism and other things that are more, undercurrents of anxiety that can be really helped with some of these practices. And you can still be somebody who aims and strives for greatness while being, feeling calmer inside of your mind on a day-to-day basis.
My 2 words of the year this year are peace and ease. And just bringing that into the work. And I love that. One thing I'm curious about, and this is just something I've always wanted to ask a therapist, is like, you seem like you have it all figured out and all together. Do you ever therapize yourself? Like, what are you learning or leaning into in the new year?
Yes, all the time. And I actually am trying to work on a life where I can unplug more. I want to bake my focaccia bread and not buy it. I want to be able to, like grow my own rosemary and, have a huge rosemary bush and things that really connect me back to just the very simple things in life. And I'm, in my mind, I want to do it. And I always kind of find the busy, but 2024 is definitely the year where I am going to welcome in a very, very like wholehearted slowing down, getting back into nature, getting back into the things that truly matter, all those little miracles that, kind of life has and throws at us, like this beautiful moon that we have and the sunsets that we get every day. And just like really dive into those things that feed the soul and are mostly free.
Beautiful. Where can everybody find out more about you, connect with you, get your book, listen to your podcast? Give us all of the places.
Yes. So I am at drmarielbuqué.com. I'm mostly on LinkedIn these days, Dr. Mariel Buqué there. And then my book is wherever books are sold, Break the Cycle is there.
Thank you. And your podcast.
My podcast is also called Break the Cycle. And actually in this season, I'm bringing in my parents, my sister, and my nephew to have conversations with me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was such an amazing treat.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, thank you so much for watching. If you have a quick second, take a second, make sure you're subscribed to my show. And if you love today's marketing tips, tricks, strategies, and life talk, then check out this episode. You are going to love it.
You know more than anyone else, couple things. One is that you have to be able to expand your capacity for what you get done if you want to grow. What got you here is not going to get you there, right? So all of the different tricks and tools and techniques that you use to get you to this level, if you want to either grow your team